Another major myth that MMT provides you with the knowledge about is the so-called crowding out accusation that students learn in their economic studies. Now, what's that about? Well, the allegation is that there's a finite pool of savings available at any point in time. Now, this comes back to pre-Keynesian classical type ideas that were called the loanable funds theory. And this is a finite pool of savings. If there's competition for those savings from borrowers, then that will push up the price of those savings, the interest rate. And so the savings are meant to be channeled into business firms so that they can invest in equipment and productive infrastructure and build the potential capacity of the economy and so on and so forth. And so the argument is that governments have to borrow, myth number one, in order to run fiscal deficits. And so they borrow out and compete for this finite pool of savings with business firms, and that competition allegedly drives up interest rates and squeezes out business firms from getting access to funds at lower interest rates, and therefore squeezes out productive investment. And there's a whole lot of then ideology imposed upon that little story about how government spending is wasteful and private business investment is always productive. That's a separate story. Now, the first way in which we can conceive of the error is to go back to how we characterise the effect of spending on income and on saving. So when the government runs a deficit, it's injecting spending into the economy, which creates growth in national income, as we've already learned, which then stimulates saving. So there's no finite pool of savings. Savings grows with the deficit. That's the first point. But the second point relates to our conception of the banking system. Now, students in banking economics are taught that banks are these institutions where someone sits behind a desk and a person walks in with a pot of money and plops it on the desk and says, "This is my deposit." And then the bank builds those deposits and then loans them out to borrowers. The causality being deposits have got to come in first and then loans can go out. Now, the reality of the modern banking system is it's exactly the opposite. The way the banks operate is to sit there and wait for credit-worthy borrowers to come into the bank, ask for a loan, and when the bank decides that they're creditworthy, they go, "Okay, tick," type some numbers into a computer, and the loan creates the deposit, which the borrower can then go away and draw down and buy whatever they wanted to. So the banks are not constrained in the modern societies by how much they've got in their vaults. Banks create money out of thin air when they create a loan. And then they worry about the consequences of that later. And what I'm referring to here is when the person who borrows the money starts depositing cheques around the place to buy things, that's going to be drawn back on the bank, who might have to pay another bank. And that's the role of the reserve system that we'll talk about when we consider monetary policy and the role of the central bank. But the lesson is that the banks will just keep creating loans as long as there's creditworthy borrowers coming in to seek funds, and that's totally independent of what the government is doing with respect to fiscal policy. There is no crowding out. That's a myth.